Welcome to part 2 of chapter 5. In this part, we will talk about a very important phase under project scope management, which is called collecting requirements or managing requirements. So, what is a requirement? Well, using the definition from the Project Management Book of Knowledge, requirement can be defined as a condition or capability that must be met or possessed by a system, product, service, result, or component to satisfy a contract, standard, specification, or other formal documents. Um, in the context of IT and telecom project management, a requirement a requirement is some kind of condition in relation to the final hardware, software, or networking product that must be met. Typically, those requirements they fall into two categories: functional requirements, meaning something that the system, the product can do. Let's say if we're talking about software application, then by a functional requirement we mean some kind of functional point or functionality of that software. Or non-functional. Non-functional is not about doing something, it's something that a system needs to have, some kind of property. An example of a non-functional requirement towards software can be something like cost. It needs to be cheap, right? So that's a non-functional requirement. Now, for some IT projects, collecting and managing requirements is a very complex procedure, especially if it happens when you're developing something complex, something big. So that's why collecting and management requirements is considered to be a project on its own. And this project is subdivided into phases called elicitation, meaning collecting requirements from relevant users or stakeholders. Analysis. So once you collect those requirements, you analyze them. Specification. Based on your analysis, you could come up with an organized, refined list of requirements. And validation. Validation means presenting your requirements to important stakeholders or users and having their final approval on that list of requirements. It is important to use an iterative approach to defining requirements since it's impossible for your users, for your stakeholders, from the very beginning to give you a comprehensive and clear list of requirements. During the early stages of a project, your users, your stakeholders may not know what kind of requirements they have. And it's only when, with the passage of time, as you proceed with your project, your users, your end users, your stakeholders start to gain a better understanding as to what needs to be done, what kind of features they want to see in your final product, and what kind of properties that final product needs to have. And it is okay to spend more time during the requirements analysis phase or requirements collection phase. As you can see from this diagram that is based on economic research, it's very easy to change, to modify requirements during the requirements collection phase. In fact, it doesn't cost you that much. That doesn't cost you anything at all, almost, right? So it's very easy to change requirements when you're still talking about requirements, when you're still collecting them. But when your system goes live, when it goes into operation, it becomes very costly to do those changes. The difference can be of a magnitude of 100, right? So it costs $1 to do changes to requirements at the requirements gathering chain, and then it will be 100 times as much, right? Or maybe $1,000 versus $100,000. So that's why it's a good idea to spend more time collecting, refining, analyzing, communicating requirements at this stage, as opposed to collecting requirements when your system is already in operation, because making changes to the system as it is already live, as it's already in operation, can be very costly and disruptive to the entire organization. So what are some of the main methods for collecting requirements? Those methods are related to general research approaches, and they're listed here. I think the most commonly used method is interviewing. Basically interviewing relevant end users and stakeholders, let's say face to face, and asking them about their requirements towards a product. Interviewing is often used because it's the most intuitive way of collecting information. In a way, it's the easiest way, right? It's the easiest methodology. You just schedule an interview with an end user and you ask them about what kind of features they need, what kind of properties they wish the system to have, and so forth. But also interviewing can be costly because it's a big burden on time. I mean, you have to spend your own time interviewing people. People will also spend their own working time, and sometimes you schedule a half an hour interview, but before you schedule it, you spend 1 hour communicating back and forth, trying to find an appropriate slot for that interview. Then somebody comes late by half an hour, then you extend your interview by another half an hour. So the next thing you know, half an hour becomes 3-4 hours of somebody's work time, which is quite costly if you're interviewing dozens and dozens of users. Sometimes focus groups and facilitated workshops, they allow you to save time. Focus groups and facilitated workshops such as joint requirements planning, they're like group interview session where you bring everybody together so you don't have to interview people individually. And those groups, they brainstorm about requirements together. So that saves a little bit of time. Sometimes you have a number of group creativity and decision-making techniques. In other words, during those focus group or group brainstorming session, you may try to induce creativity somehow. And there are a lot of methods out there, and most of those methods, they're related to design science, to creativity research. For example, mind mapping is one of those methods for stimulating group creativity and decision making during a group interview or group brainstorming session. Sometimes questionnaires and surveys are used to solicit user requirements. Again, in a way it's an easy way to gather information because once you design a questionnaire or survey, especially if it's an online survey or online questionnaire, you can send it to an unlimited number of people. And nowadays there's this online software that can be used for creating questionnaires like surveymonkey.com. Not only can create questionnaires there, you can also collect, tabulate data, and even analyze it using that tool. The drawback of questions and surveys is that they don't allow for additional communication and clarification. So whatever you put in the survey will be what your respondents see. So if they don't understand a particular question, there is no opportunity for you to clarify it, something that you can do during interviews. And the other problem is that questionnaires and surveys, especially online ones, they tend to have low response rate. Nowadays, we are bombarded with all kinds of survey requests, and a lot of people just ignore those surveys. Observation, another way of collecting requirements, just by observing people, what they do, how they do their work, and based on that, figuring out what they need. Prototyping. Prototyping means creating a small beta version or a small draft of a particular document and presenting that prototype to your end users. And this is done to stimulate their thinking and creativity because not everybody is creative, not everybody can come up with a list of requirements just using his or her imagination from scratch. Most people want to see something tangible before they have any ideas, right? So instead of asking somebody, so what kind of car do you need? What kind of house do you need? You may show them a car or show them a house and ask them, so what do you think? Do you like this house? Do you like this car? Because in the absence of a specific example, your end users may not be in a good position to give you any ideas at all. And then there are a lot of software tools that kind of formalize any of those techniques or a combination of those techniques. And that software can be used for collecting requirements, managing requirements, communicating requirements, and so forth. So those are some of the common methods for collecting requirements. Now, this whole procedure of collecting requirements through research, through any of those methods that we've just discussed, sometimes can generate rich documents that have text, images, diagrams, videos, and other types of media. It can be organized in different ways. Those different requirements can be broken down into different categories. So there are, it can be quite sophisticated the approach to documenting requirements can be quite sophisticated. Some organizations, they have they require the requirements management plan that describes in detail how project requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed. At the minimum, you should use something along the lines of a requirements traceability matrix, or RTM. It's a simple table that lists requirements and its various attributes. So a sample requirements traceability matrix can look something like this. It's a table where each requirement has a code or number, it has a name, it falls into a particular category, then source, where it came from, and status, whether you already met that requirement or not. So at the minimum, you should organize your requirements in that kind of fashion. So that completes part 2 of chapter 5. Thank you for watching.